I want to read some of Khrushchev's words. I got his book here, Khruschev Remembers, probably one of his books. But I wanted to get Khrushchev's words and his perspective on the Cuban Missile Crisis and his words on other things too, but specifically what happened with the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Bernie Sanders just said Cuba had good literacy programs, which is the honest-to-God truth, and yet somehow people are going to sit there and say 9/11 victims went to Cuba to get some health care. And then the coronavirus, the whole bunch of stuff that Cuba does, they have a higher life expectancy than a lot of smaller islands because of their healthcare system. They have good literacy programs. So yeah, I mean, even though Cuba has its problems, to sit there and say that it doesn't have a good literacy program, it doesn't have good healthcare, well, you're just being, a liar. You're just being a lying piece of shit. And why do you want to be a lying piece of shit? So since we're going to talk about Cuba, let's let's situate America and Cuba and Soviet Union in historical context. So let's go back to 1962. Khruschev is, the prime minister, president, the leader of Russia, which was the USSR, the United Socialist Soviet Republic. And so it was Russia with a bunch of other nations around it. So 1962, you just got JFK in America elected in 61. So he'd just been president for a year or two. And then we had the Bad Pigs fiasco. So the CIA had set up JFK to tell him to go invade Cuba with all these ex-Cuban exiles. And the way that the Kennedy said that it was all legal was that they were helping some Cubans fight, a political battle for them. So they were assisting Cubans in their own they didn't do anything. They give them arms and weapons and transportation. But it wasn't Americans who were invading. It was other Cubans who were invading. And the Bay of Pigs fiasco is going to be terrible. Everybody in the Bay of Pigs are going to be captured or killed. So everybody in that American unit that invaded, and the CIA hope, the hope of the CIA was as soon as JFK got caught up in the Cuban affair, then he would actually send American troops and put boots on the ground. After the Bay of Pigs fiasco, Che Guevara is going to say, thank you for the Bay of Pigs, to Kennedy. Thank you, America. Thank you, big imperialist, capitalist swine. Because of the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Revolution was stronger than ever, declared Che Guevara. So the reason why the Cuban Missile Crisis is going to happen right after the Bay of Pigs is going to happen because Russia, in order to make sure, to protect Cuba, Cuba is a good friend, Cuba is a socialist nation, and in order to protect Cuba, the Russians were going to send the Soviet Republic was going to send some nuclear-tipped warheads to put on their island, not to invade, not to attack America, but for purely self-defense reasons. So that's, kind of this is going to be the closest the Cold War ever turned into a nuclear holocaust for the world. So the Cuban Missile Crisis is going to be, we're going to come very close to a nuclear winter. We're going to blow up the whole world in the Cuban Missile Crisis of 62. There was only 1 minute to midnight. 1 minute to midnight. That's how close the whole world came to blowing up. 1 minute to midnight for all of humanity. 1 minute. I think we're about 1 minute away today, too. Maybe even closer. But this just goes to show you, this is, how close it was this one day and then where we're at today. We can, analyze it later. But the closest to Cold War, in fact, the closest probably humanity up until that time ever came to a nuclear winter. The Cold War is the apparent war between the two nuclear powers. So America has nukes, Russia's got nukes. Truman is going to make a speech. He's going to have a doctrine. He's going to give a doctrine saying it's up to us to contain the USSR. He's going to help to create NATO. And so from 1947 to 1991 is when the Cold War happened. So that's 4 decades, right? 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. So all those years were the Cold War. America and Russia were at the stalemate. They wouldn't attack each other head on. No hot wars between America and Russia. But we would fight in Korea. We would fight in Vietnam. We would fight all these different proxy wars all over the world because now the USSR was we had two superpowers in the world. Now the USSR had nukes. Now America had 18,000 nukes to, Russia's 2,000 nukes. So we had way more nukes, but both, nations had enough nukes to really, cause some major damage. In Cuba, I heard that they could have basically bombed every, major American city except for Seattle. And so, if it would have turned into a nuclear winter, then, all of America would have been gone. And we have the capability of wiping out humanity today. So the fact that, this is still, basically, we still face the same problems that we faced 50 years ago when it comes to nuclear weapons. So yeah, there you go. So there, okay, the Truman Doctrine to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1991. So Truman makes a speech, starts NATO, then 4 decades of Cold War, and then the Berlin Wall falls in Germany, and then that's when they say the Cold War is over. The Cuban Missile Crisis, since the Russians were sending nukes over, then Kennedy went ahead and instituted a naval quarantine of Cuba. And the only reason that JFK did all this was just appearance of being weak. He didn't want to appear weak. And the end result is going to be the Soviets are going to take their nuclear warheads and go home. And so it turns out good for America. We don't have, nuclear weapons just right off the coast of our southern border. There's going to be a 13-day confrontation between the U.S. and the USSR after the discovery of Soviet ballistic missiles deployment in Cuba. So once that happens, now JFK had started all this, okay? JFK had started all of this by putting Jupiter nuke missiles in Turkey. So we already had nuclear weapons. We put Jupiter nuke weapons in Turkey. So we did it first, right next to Russia. We put a bunch of nuclear warheads right next to Russia, and then Cuba's having this, dealing with this shitstorm of Bay of Pigs, and now they need some protection. So they said, well, there's our foothold, just like in Venezuela, right? As soon as we declare an enemy on the Western Hemisphere, then we just open the doors up for other nations to come in and support them. And then October 22nd, 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis speech. This is JFK saying, we found these ballistic missiles and ordered the quarantine, right? Not a blockade, because blockade is like a war thing, but a quarantine is just, well, that's like a nicer word for blockade. And then, any attacks from Cuba would be blamed on the Soviet Union. So if there was any attacks that happened during this quarantine, Soviet Union would be blamed, and then they would go to war with Soviet Union. So JFK, in order to assuage his ego, he didn't want to look weak, right? So he's going to go ahead and say he's going to obliterate the entire Soviet Union to, for allowing Cuba to defend themselves. So let's read some of Khruschev. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the Caribbean Crisis was an important test for us. They call it the Caribbean Crisis, not the Cuban Missile Crisis, but the Caribbean Crisis. It was a test of our abilities at the time that we might have had to resort to the use of nuclear weapons. I've already made statements about the episode both in public and in my memoirs, but I wish to add some thoughts here. Fidel Castro was our friend, and revolutionary Cuba was threatened by the saber-rattling militarists of the Pentagon. Reactionary circles in the United States treated Cuba as a festering sore on their country's own body. The intelligence agency of the American Army organized an invasion force consisting of Cuban counter-revolutionaries. The Americans miscalculated. They did not plan well. They overestimated the strength of the counter-revolutionaries. They thought that the invasion would trigger an uprising in support of the counter-revolution, but that was wishful thinking. Castro handled the situation brilliantly. It took him, I think, only 3 days or a little more to smash the invaders to pieces. So the Bay of Pigs, 3 days, Fidel Castro captures or kills every single last one of the people who invaded his country. He's got a right to defend himself, and so it took him only 3 days or a little more to smash the invaders to pieces. However, we knew that the Americans wouldn't let the matter rest there. We knew they couldn't reconcile themselves to the rout of the counter-revolutionaries. We knew the U.S. would never swallow such a bitter pill. Even after the abortive invasion, the Americans were determined to liquidate Cuba's independent social and political system and establish in its place a puppet regime headed by a new Batista. So it was clear that America wanted to undo the Cuban Revolution and to put in their own puppet government. So that's Khruschev, right? Khruschev is clear that he's saying that Cuba was invaded, Cuba was attacked, and Russia went to Cuba's defense. So for, Kennedy to say, well, if, you attack us after this quarantine, then that's a war. They were saying it was a casus belli. It was a belli, where they say that was an act of war. Quarantine, a blockade is an act of war. No ships can come in and out of Cuba. So Cuba, therefore, so the quarantine could have been an act of war. It's not self-defense, but it's, stopping people from, on the international high seas, right? Who's got control over the international high seas? Well, apparently if it's close to our borders, and so yeah, okay. So he's wanting to save Cuba from American imperialism, which is right. That's correct. That's Khruschev should have been worried about American imperialism if the Bay Pigs didn't say, the Bay Pigs was a failure, but the Bay Pigs definitely said that America wanted, to take Cuba, especially the Cuban revolutionaries, out. They wanted to end the Cuban revolutionaries. So, okay. So now we're at DEFCON 2. There's a naval blockade. They say it's an act of war. Tensions are getting higher and higher. Now, Kennedy had started this by putting Jupiter missiles in Turkey, and now you have, missiles that are coming into Cuba, or they were building a facility, or something was going on in Cuba, and now we got this blockade. So, yeah. What? Time is almost gone. Well, I guess we'll come back to talking a little bit more about this.